Is it recording?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there we go. Welcome, you guys, to another episode of the Cerebral Palsy and Fitness Podcast. I have Zane Emerson, who's the author of Cascade and Overflow. And today we're going to go over what he's written, a little bit about himself, disability representation, and a whole lot more. Welcome, Zane.
Thanks for having me, David. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to have you on because you have a very unique set of books, especially at the topics you go into. One of the things I'm most interested in is, or from what I read a little bit about your backgrounds as far as your books, is it's mostly about saving the universe. And also, before we get into that, I would like to know more about you and your background. Like, how did you get started with becoming an author? What was it like for you growing up, and a whole lot more?
I have been writing in various forms for the better part of 20 years now. I really started when I was like 8 or 9 years old. Oh God, 23 years. I've been writing since I was basically a kid. I've always loved storytelling and the art of just kind of bring to life these ideas and this feel that just kind of sits in our heads. Growing up, I was kind of like an outcast myself. I was very, very much socially awkward. I didn't understand people. So I always like to joke that I took my imaginary friends and I wrote stories for them because it made them feel more real to me. And even today, when I'm writing, like my wife, my beta readers, they always say that when I talk about my characters in my books, I'm always like talking like they're my best friends, that I've known these people all my life, and I can just tell you, oh yeah, this is Taylor. He's just, he's kind of a douche, but you get used to him. So like it's kind of a weird balance. I started writing really early. I like to write kind of mystery stuff when I was a kid. The Hardy Boys, kind of like that was like my first really foray into it. I didn't really stick with the mystery genre though, because it's kind of hard to write for me. I mean, yeah. I'd spell things out way too quickly. That's when I kind of really got into the fantasy world. Like Lord of the Rings, big inspiration for me. Game of Thrones, of course, was a huge inspiration. And of course, Harry Potter. Like all those really were the core start of my delve into the fantasy worlds. And each one is problematic in their own way here or there. They each have their own issues, but that's all books. And it's hard to say like, oh, this is problematic because it doesn't live up to today's standards. And as a writer, it's my kind of job, especially as I'm telling stories, to make it relatable for everybody. And the problem is you're never going to be able to do that either. So you have to take the shortcuts where you can, but do your best to represent, do your best to not talk down to your readers. Because I mostly write young adult stuff now. And that's because to me, I've always loved young adult books. There's a certain amount of hopefulness to them. There's this feeling of we can take on the world, we can make changes, we can do great things. So it's that coming of ageness that has really always spoke to me. And with the first two books I put out here, that was very much my goal, was that I wanted to get that feeling of a bunch of friends who get pulled into this world that they know but they don't know, and then they're put into bodies that aren't theirs, at least for most of them, and they have to kind of get used to this whole, okay, this is me but this isn't me mentality, which is kind of a big theme in a lot of my books.
Would you say that since you wrote the book yourself, do you feel like there's a little bit about yourself in those books?
100%, absolutely. Because I almost exclusively write in the first person perspective. I feel like from a narrative perspective, you can really get into the main characters' like mentality, and you get much more personal with them. And because of that, oftentimes, I'm not going to say that every main character I've ever written has been like me, but there's little bits of me in there. There's my sarcasm, there's my kind of wry, dry humor, and my little bit of, well, of course that would happen. Why wouldn't it happen to me? Like that kind of, and it's one of those things that as a writer, you pull from people, you pull from your own experiences when you're making characters, because that's how you make them real. Like
Right.
because if you make every character too perfect or without flaws, then they're John Does, they're Mary Sues, they're like, nobody's going to relate to a perfect character, and that's always been my perspective on the issue.
How do you handle a situation, you being an author? Because I know writing and then getting a book published can be very, very daunting and extremely difficult at times. How do you handle rejection?
Oh God. So that is a very, very difficult hurdle for a lot of people. And it comes down to the whole sense of traditional publishing versus self-publishing. I am exclusively a self-published author. I had originally considered going the traditional route, getting an agent, going through a publishing house, all that stuff. But once you start putting more hands in the pots, they want to change things. They want the story to be
Right.
this. They want the story to be that. And it loses the intention of the author, at least to me. And this isn't indicative of everybody or of how all publishing is, but for me, I know that I kind of write and tell more niche stories, and I don't like to necessarily write. What's the word I'm looking for here? I don't think that every story needs to have an outright message to it. Not to say there isn't messages. There isn't messages like friendship can conquer, or that teamwork is how things happen, or that there's hope even in the darkest of times. But from a narrative perspective, a lot of books, movies, and media nowadays almost comes built in with commentary on the world around us.
Right.
And to me, writing and books is supposed to be about escapism a little bit, because we already live in a time and a world where things kind of can suck a little bit. We don't need to be
They really can.
what we're watching for entertainment or reading for entertainment to be equally as crappy. That said, those books are also important because they do help to shine the light on these issues in a more palatable way. So it's the balance.
Yeah, yeah. Like I'm wondering, what are some, I guess, I wouldn't say, I could say topics that you cover in your books. Like, do you have any topics specifically that you kind of cover?
So in the Katanari stream, which is where Cascade, Overflow, and that series has a total planned book count of 7 or 8 books at this point. 6 in the main series, 2 or 3 little short story anthologies. And the overarching theme and message of those books is that creativity and out of the box thinking is imperative to our life. When you try and focus and you try and follow things to the T, things aren't going to go how you expect.
Right.
But even more so, I think at least with these books, there's not a huge message to it. These were really kind of a passion project, more about the fun, and because a lot of what inspired this set of books specifically was always like, oh, I love dungeon mastering, I love being a DM for D&D, but wouldn't it be so cool if I got to go into a world that I created? And that was all it took to inspire this series itself. Whereas some of my other projects that I'm in the process of working on kind of based more along the lines of hopelessness and being able to find inner strength even when you're outside of your own comfort zone. And that's something that very much speaks to me, because again, I'm a very, very socially awkward person. I've always had kind of I don't know how to interact with people on a face-to-face level. So I kind of write these books almost to remind myself, hey, just because you think you're weird doesn't mean everybody thinks you're weird. And sometimes you just have to put yourself out there.
Right. And everybody, if you think about it, everybody communicates differently, because some people could be good at communicating orally in front of people, and some people could be good at communicating through paper and through writing books. And that's you.
Yep. And I've always said that I am 1,000 times better on paper than I ever am face to face. I can get through conversations. I can like make arguments and points, but when I have time to sit down and really kind of just think about what I want to say, I can really get where I think I can really make my point really well. And that's kind of where like a lot of my writing has always come from. I mean, I think the problem I've had though is that I can be a little bit overly perfectionist with my writing though. So like that's where the balance comes in again, because you can be really good on paper, but if it takes you years to put it on paper, then how good are you?
No, and I can imagine you having to read something over and over and over, because you want to make sure that you don't like submit anything that might look like there's a typo or something that's messed up, and then you go back to it, you're like, man, what the hell? Like I should have caught this like right away, you know?
I actually learned a lot going the self-published route. With Cascade, there were a lot of mistakes in that book when I first put it out. I had a team of beta readers who like read through it for content and issues, and they found a lot of issues, but I noticed that I didn't put in the amount of effort that was really required. It was a big learning experience for me, that I needed to really be more conscious about the issues, the editing. Because you're right, I've probably read my books like more times than anyone else. I've gone through them both like a dozen times each, because like you're looking at every line, and every time you read through it though, you start to glaze a little bit, like you're like skimming, because like, oh, I know this, I don't need to read it. But if you skim too much, you're missing out on important details. So Cascade, when I first published it and uploaded it, I ended up having to upload probably about 8 more copies of it over the course of the first week after it got released, because every few days I would, oh crap, there's another issue, oh there's another issue, it was terrible. Overflow was a seamless one. I uploaded 1 copy of it, and I have not uploaded in a fixed copy, because the team I had that helped me make sure it was ready to go were on top of it. And I can't thank them enough. Like I've gotten a few people who now, like, you know, because it's weird when you start to get some followers and people who enjoy your work, because
Right.
you're just like, oh yeah. I need some beta readers to kind of get a sneak peek at this book before it's actually ready to put out there, and help me see if there's any glaring issues. And I was very thankful that Cascade had, even with its issues, inspired and drawn the attention of some really, really cool people. And like an even bigger shout out to my narrator, because I have both my books actually in audiobook form, which was a tremendously important thing for me to do, because that's how I mostly consume books, is I listen to audiobooks, because with having a toddler and working all the time, where do you find the time to sit down and read? But with an
Right.
audiobook, you pop your headphones in, you can just be working and listening along. So it was one of those things that when I first put my books out, I was so glad that I was able to find a way to get them turned into audiobooks. And Mitchell Cochran, he's the guy who did the narrating for both of them. He's signed on basically to narrate the entire series. And I've always said that my narrator is one of my first fans, because he said he just fell in love with the books, and that's why he's so happy to keep coming back to them.
That is fantastic. And you know, come to think of it, it's amazing how far technologically wise we've grown, and as a society, because now a lot of people have different options to be able to access a book. You know, they don't have to just do it now paper book, but they have
Mm-hmm.
the digital, they have the Kindle, they can listen to it. You have closed captioning, so a lot of people with different disabilities and different ways of communicating can actually consume a book in the way that they find fit and easy.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, it comes down to that whole accessibility. By offering audiobooks of my audio versions of my books, I am providing one more method that people can intake them. Because again, if you have somebody who's blind who loves to read, but you don't have a braille copy, well, bam, they have an audiobook they can listen to happily. And it's or again, people who just don't have the time to sit down and read, people who people, this is going to sound as a weird thing to say, especially as a writer, but I legitimately believe that audiobooks are the best way to consume a book, especially when you have a narrator who cares about what they're reading, because you get so much more from the inflection, from the tone. So when that you can really feel the depth of emotion in the characters. And that comes down to having somebody who, well, one, it comes down to having an author who cares enough and not just isn't just trying to get that extra form out there, but two, having that person who's willing to put in that time and effort to make something that resonates with people.
Right. That's the best, when you can connect with your audience and it shows that you care deeply about how they feel, their emotion. You know, they're the ones that can give you that real feedback. Like, to be honest with you, like, for example, like people that live close to you, like your family and your friends, are going to be like, oh, this is great. But when it comes to an actual audience, they'll let you know right off the bat, like they're completely honest. Like they'll tell you, I've had people before that tell me, oh man, your podcast is sounding like complete shit. And you know, people might not some people might take it offensive, but I'm like, you know what? I look back to it and I'm like, it did sound like complete shit, so we might as well fix it, right?
Yeah, like so these are not the first books I've actually written to completion. Before I published these two, I had a total of 4 stories that I have written all the way through, that are between 70,000 and 100,000 words long. But two of them were fan fiction stories, because when I was a teenager, I got really into writing fan fiction. And that's kind of where I really started to develop my own narrative style. Because the cool thing about fan fiction is you have these pre-built characters and a pre-built audience of people who know these characters, and you can really kind of sink your teeth into writing a story around these characters. But the first book that I ever tried to write myself, which, fun fact, I'm actually in the process of rewriting it right now. That first book took me 10 years to write to completion.
Wow.
And it was partially because I kept second guessing myself, but because I got so discouraged by some negative comments that a beta reader made when because I had written about 2/3 of the book, and I was just trying to get some feedback. And I was a relatively new writer to creating your own worlds and being serious about it, that I sent it out to a few people, and I got back that the writing was terrible, it feels laborious to read, and it's just like, nobody's going to want to read past the first page. And that hit me really hard, that I actually put the book down and did not touch it again for about 5 years. And my lovely wife read it, read the first couple chapters when we first started dating. And she's like, oh, it could use some work, but it's not terrible. You just kind of have to give it a little TLC. And that I've always said she's my inspiration and my muse. And she had that belief that I could do it. And I finished it. And it was well written, but that first half of the book was still pretty bad. So I kind of was like, you know what? I finished the book. I need to take a break from this world for a little while, because I've been working on it for so long. But again, it was still that little bit of not resentment, but disappointment in myself that I couldn't write something perfect right away, which is silly to say because you only get better with time. And I 100% believe that I have become a stronger writer with every single book, every single thing I've written, even from Cascade to Overflow. Cascade, I think, was an excellent book, but Overflow to me trumps it. It is a far tighter book. It feels like it flows better. The story is a little bit more coherent. And that's not to say Cascade is bad. I'm not going to talk bad about my own books. I think Cascade is a fun story, and it is a very good opening to a series. But I am old enough and wise enough to know that it's the first book that I published, and as long as I keep putting in that effort and keep trying, I'm going to only become a better storyteller.
That's what matters. You hit it right then and there. It's about being persistent, never giving up. Just keep going with what you intend to do, and you're gonna encounter bumps along the way, but those bumps are a part of the journey, you know.
Yep.
And I know that one of the things you mentioned, well, you reached out to me about I guess a project you're working on as far as a character with a disability.
Yes. So it's currently I come up with titles kind of on the fly. So I don't have a title for this project yet. But it's very much like a trying to think of relative I don't even know what word I'm looking for right now. I call myself a writer. Relevant or relatively speaking, something similar. Like how I explained these books are Dungeons and Dragons meet Jumanji. This new project is sort of Sword Art Online or Dot Hack Sign, any number of video game animes meets superheroes.
Right.
And when I reached out to you, it's because I had a character that I was developing for the book that was going to be disabled, and the what I wanted to do, especially when I'm writing a character that I don't have the experience of being disabled. I don't. But that said, I believe that the inclusion is necessary at certain points. Like, you don't want to include a character or a type of character just for the inclusion, because then it feels token. It feels like you're just, oh yeah, look, I have this character in here. But you also don't want to go so far to the left that says, oh look, I'm trying to make a message about this kind of person either. So I reached out to you because this character I had is, and I'm still developing him. So let me be completely honest. I'm still in the process of developing it, and my writing style is very much an on the fly. I kind of write what feels right. I don't do a lot of outlining because I feel that the best stories come from when you're able to just sit there and start writing and let the story tell itself. So this character I have is a character who is a paraplegic, that he is brought into this virtual world and has full access to his body again. And I wanted to, when I reached out to you, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't not downplaying his disability, but making sure that this character could revel in the power or the change in what he can do without making him resentful of his disability either. Because I don't think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't think that most people with disabilities are resentful all the time of their disabilities.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right.
But I can also, again, and this is just from my perspective of the research I've done, it is easy to have something change and be like, oh, so this is what normal people feel like. And I hate to say normal because everybody's normal. But but like on a level of people who don't have to struggle with having these extra perspectives or perceptions from the outside world. So, and it's why I asked you, like, one of the most important things I asked you, that I feel like I asked you was, would it be more impactful if this character is brought into this virtual world, but still had their disability, but it didn't weigh them down? And I feel like that's, again, a weird line to run, because then you're making the argument of, well, then did these programs specifically make it so that disabled people were stuck as disabled people? So you can see how the balance starts to come into play. And that's, like I said, that one is probably third on my list of projects right now, because well, honestly, I bounce between projects. Whatever I'm feeling connected to at the moment, that's what I sit down and write, because I try and write every single night. Even if it's just 500 words, I try and get it on paper, because you cannot edit a blank page.
Right.
You can always fix bad writing, but you can't fix no writing.
Yeah, like now that you mentioned that, as far as what we talked about, your book and disability representation, it's funny because you see all these TV series, all these books that people release, and they like when somebody's gonna cast somebody in a TV series, they'll cast somebody that's fully able-bodied to play somebody who's disabled, and that irritates me so much, because they have very little idea as to how the disability is. And the fact that you reached out to me firsthand to talk about this character and the disability shows that you actually care about what you're writing, your audience, and the individual itself.
Yeah, and that's again, that's very, very important to me. Like with Cascade and Overflow and that entire series, that is kind of a different world, but all the characters that play parts in the main characters are things that I am very intimately familiar with at this point in my life. Like the main character, well, I would say there's 2.5 characters that have big influences on just who I am. And it's because that was the easiest thing to pull from for my own knowledge and my own ability to make these characters. One of the characters is, I've always made this very clear, is based 100% on my wife, Sarah. She is the love interest for the main character. She is very strong, but she has like this kind of sweet Southern belle kind of personality to her there. And then the other two characters in it are based completely on two of my closest friends. And they were very instrumental in kind of helping me shape their personalities, because I have a friend who's this big, boisterous, lovable dude that he's kind of a jock, but everybody loves him because he relates to everybody. And that's who Soren in the book is. He's this character that, even though he's this big brute of an orc, everybody loves him. Whereas another character is completely based on another friend who I love him to death, but he's a little bit of a dick. And he's a little bit full of himself, and he's aware that he's full of himself, and he's aware that he thinks he can do everything better than everybody else. And it was very easy for me to be like, okay, this guy, yep, you make this character, and I can see this character as you. But on that same note, it's been very interesting because as I've had people read it, I always read the books. I've always liked to, if I get one-on-one time to talk to anybody who's read my books. Excuse me. One of the first things I always like to ask is, who's your favorite character? And again, because I'm talking about these guys like they're my friends. So I like to see like, okay, who's your favorite character? Because to me, that tells me if you care enough about a character to say, yeah, that's my favorite, it means that I made them realistic enough that you can relate to them and you could imagine them. And Soren, again, is one of the people that people always say, oh, I love him. He's just so fun. He kind of is like this. He's not the comic relief of the story, but he definitely brings levity to situations. He definitely brings like this little bit of okay, yeah, I know we're kind of screwed, but how can we make this fun while we're doing it attitude.
That's fantastic. I love the fact that you use, not necessarily use, but you take advantage of those that support you around you, and you're like, if you can formulate an idea centered around them for your book, that is absolutely fantastic, and I love that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to also ask you if there were, and if there was an author you would like to collab with, who would you like to collab with on a book?
Oh, there's a lot, honestly. I mean, I love all of Neil Gaiman's work. I think he writes some amazingly fun stuff. Good Omens is one of my favorite, and that's one where Neil Gaiman collaborated with Terry Pratchett, and it's just such a fun story. But on an indie level or on a smaller, more current times, I'd say Drew Hayes. He authored the Superpowers series, which is hands down my favorite book series of all time, which a free shout out for him, I guess. It's basically Harry Potter meets superheroes, but in college. And it is just, it's fun. It's interesting, the mystery that's involved. And he writes just great work. I've had the pleasure to talk with him quite a few times. So maybe it's not out there, it's out there as a collab, but who else though? Unfortunately, some of the people I would love to collab with are dead at this point. Like, who wouldn't want to try and write something with Tolkien? That's a great question.
I like to throw curveballs sometimes during my podcast.
Yeah, no. Another person, Jeremy Scott. He most people probably recognize him or know him as the guy who does Cinema Sins, the YouTube channel. He's the voice of that channel, but he also writes, and he has this fantastic book series called The Ables, which is actually about a group of disabled superheroes. And it is just such a fantastic YA read because it hits all those important things about how we can still do things, that people can still do things no matter what their circumstances are. And I just think that's such a great message.
Yeah, that's how the world should be, is like you said, we are capable of doing anything as long as we believe in ourselves, we put in the work. We don't give up on ourselves, which obviously it happens at certain points in our lives, but we just have to keep on going and keep pushing forward.
I mean, that's exactly it though. I'm still thinking of your curveball question. Like, I'm just like going through like, who else? Like, I mean, Stephen King too. Like, that would be a great person. But
yeah, that'd be major. That'd be huge.
The thing is, I love Stephen King. He is probably hands down one of my favorite authors of all time. And it's because his style of writing is identical to mine, or I guess mine is identical to him. I should have said, I can't compare him to me. He's 10 times or 100 times the writer I'll ever be. But in terms of writing, and these are very colloquial terms. They're not like, nobody is fully one or the other. But in writing groups, we have two kinds of writing styles. We have the outliners and the pantsers. Outliners are those who write they get every single detail of what they want to write down. They know the first, second, third act. They know every character. They know every plot twist coming. And they have all that planned out, written out before they ever even start writing the first chapter. Then you have people like Stephen King and myself, who are pantsers. And what that means is we have an idea for a book, we sit down and you start writing it. And wherever the story takes you, you let it take you. And I'm not saying either one's right or wrong. And even as a pantser, I become a little bit of an outliner in hindsight. So like with Overflow, writing a sequel is a very interesting task, because with a first book, you don't have anything that you're worried about contradicting. But when you write a second book, suddenly you have to be like, well, wait, what did I say in that first book? Oh, did I say this character looked like this in the first book? Well, I can't change them in the second book. So you kind of do have to do a little bit more planning in that regard. But even so, at this point, and this is where I say I'm starting to become a bit more of an outliner, because originally the series was going to be 3 books. That's all I had planned, was a 3-book trilogy. That's all I wanted to write. Then I wrote the first book, and I'm like, oh, maybe I need a 4th book for this. I think 3 books is going to be a little bit too short. Okay, good, whatever. Started writing the second book. I get to the end of the second book, and I'm just like, nope, I can't just immediately go to book 3. There needs to be 2 books between this book and what would have been book 3. So like it kind of is like this evolving process when you don't outline, because you see where the story is going and what the story needs, and then you make adjustments accordingly.
All right, that's how it usually is, and the fact that you take your time and don't rush in between books, it's how you keep people invested, and it's actually it can be very well done. Like you said, your first book didn't turn out so well, but your second book was a lot better. So it's about evolution and improving. And
Absolutely.
with anything, it takes time. Like when I first started podcasting, I had no idea how to do audio and video, and honestly, hearing myself on camera, I thought I was awful. Like just speaking on camera, and just I don't want to. And there are times where I retake the video multiple times because I was like, it doesn't sound so good. And then now that I've done over 60 of them. By the way, you're number 60, so congratulations.
Woo-hoo!
Yeah. So, and now here we are. We're both working on our goals, and I also wanted to ask you: would you ever see your books in a movie, as a movie form? Like,
oh, that would be a dream come true. Let's just be completely honest. And that's the other thing is, I write books, but I have several other projects I'd love to work on. I have about a third of a screenplay that I've written at this point, that I would love to eventually direct myself. Like I'm not necessarily huge into the directing field, but that was some of my original background. In high school, and the single year of college I dropped out and joined the military, so I didn't ever finish college. But I loved video production. I loved the idea of creating it. Again, it was just another form of storytelling. So like I would love for my books to eventually be turned into movies or TV shows, and knock on wood, maybe it'll happen. But that only can happen is if I keep pushing and keep trying, because I mean, I'm not going to say that I've had bestsellers here. I mean, I've gotten between the book forums, the audiobooks, I've had about 150 sales total. And that's not a huge number, but it's not bad, right? And like, to me, like, I see that as kind of like this sort of not exponential growth. But the idea is that as long as I keep putting stuff out, especially as an indie author, not because the problem with traditional publishing is the lag time. I have a friend who is being traditionally published, and it's one of the best things about writer groups is we're all very open with each other. We talk to each other, we help each other out. Well, this friend is traditionally published. They got accepted by the publisher about a week before I released Cascade, back in November of last year. And their book is not going to actually be available until April of next year.
Jeez.
Yeah, and that's just the lag time because
Oh
it has to go
man.
through edits. It has to go through like the checks with the publishing house to make sure that there's nothing that they're going to disagree with. It has to go through all these extra steps. Whereas self-publishing, once I feel this book is ready, I can put it out there. And this is a huge leap up from 15, 20 years ago when self-publishing was this big expense out of pocket and it wasn't accessible to anybody. And as much crap as Amazon has done, they have really, really helped indie authors find their voices. Their Kindle Direct program is what I go through for publishing. It allows me to make my hardcovers, my paperbacks, my Kindle copies, but it also allows me to directly go through their other system, the ACX, which allowed me to find my narrator so that I could have the audiobooks. So it's this accessibility that has really come a long way, that has made it easier to put these books out. Because, and again, the problem with that is their success or failure lives and dies with me. Like, I have to be the one marketing. I have to be the one shamelessly self-promoting it at all times. And that's not a problem if you're inclined to be that kind of socially out there person. So it's made me grow as a person because I can't hide in my shell anymore. I can't be like, oh, I don't want to deal with people, because I need to be confident enough to say, my books are amazing. You should go buy it right now.
Right. You gotta be willing and able to, get like you said, get yourself out there, and remember that the only way you'll become successful as well is networking, meeting people, get into anything and everything you can. Like, right now, like, just being able to speak with you, you taught me that self-publishing is a route to go, because I myself would like to write a book about my life in general, down the line. So the fact that I got to speak with you today, it helps out a lot, because I
Yeah,
learned a
and
lot about you.
absolutely. I mean, like I said, it's I didn't know as much until, so I wrote Cascade, and a grand total, I think from start to finish, it took me 28 days to write the first draft of Cascade. And now, granted, edits and rewrites and fixes, grand total, it took about, from start to finish, about 6 months for Cascade to be ready for publishing. And again, it should have taken longer because I should have put more effort into it. It shouldn't have taken longer because I finished writing it and then I put it down for about 3 or 4 months and said, okay, I'll come back and look at you again in a little bit, because I wrote it in a fever dream. So I put it out there, and I was gonna work on some other projects. In fact, I briefly wrote a web serial for about 4 months, which is a web serial is when you have a website and you post chapter by chapter, a couple chapters a week, so people can follow along and read along as they want to. And I had a sci-fi story called Star Launch Academy that I wrote for about 4 months before I put it on hiatus, because the story wasn't quite working out how I really wanted it to. But that book itself, I wrote 80,000 words of before I finally kind of hit pause on it. And then I put pause on that in about, it is still the same year that I put out, I put this all out. I put pause on it at about April, and then I started working on Overflow. Overflow took me, again, a month to write the first draft. But because I had learned so much from my first experience self-publishing with Cascade, I knew all the steps I needed to take to have this book polished and ready to go. And 2 months after I finished the first draft in July, it was published. And again, I haven't had to go back and do any fixes to it because I have such a great team of beta readers. My dad too, he actually was my editor this time around. He
Oh,
went
that's
through
cool.
and red marked and everything. So I always I can't thank all of them enough for helping me put something out much more polished. And I think with every new book that I work on here, I'm going to have a little bit more experience, a little bit more of it streamlining it, where that little lag time is going to keep shrinking because I'm going to know what I need to do with each step. And eventually I do eventually want to, because I love my dad, but I don't want to only rely on him to do the editing and stuff because he's not
Right.
a professional editor. And I would love to eventually hire somebody to edit my books a little bit more for like line edits and content edits to kind of help me keep things a little bit smoother instead of just grammar edits, which my dad is a fantastic grammar editor. But it's not his wheelhouse of content, so he's not going to be as aware of what to look for, well, this needs to be fixed because it doesn't line up with what you said back here.
Yeah, and a fun fact for my audience, Zane himself took the time to revise my bio and turn into something awesome that I've used since you've wrote. Like I've literally reused that same bio for everything from when I'm promoting, myself. Of course, I had somebody else, a close friend of mine. She made my flyer that I used to promote, and and that's to attest how good of a writer Zane is. Like you're to me, you're underrated. So a lot of people, but
I
that's how
appreciate
that's how
that.
I feel. That's how I feel.
I like to think. I mean, I know this sounds like not very humble to say it, but I do feel a little bit underrated. And it's because that there is a lot of content out there, and it's hard for people to say that they're going to read something or another. And especially as a new author, it's hard to convince people to give you a chance because with somebody like Stephen King, J.K. Rowling, wow, I am blanking on authors right now, and that is not a good look for me. So let's just say with Stephen King, he has a built-in audience. He has people who are going to see Stephen King on a book and know, okay, this is probably going to be pretty good. And that's not to say he doesn't have his bad books. He has a good few of them that are decent books up until about the third act. And then it's like, okay, you did not know how to finish this story, sir. But I digress, not the point. As a new author, you have to not only convince people to give you a chance, but if you have something that's a little bit of a weak start, you have to convince them to stick with you and grow with you. And I've been very fortunate that I have a good few people who are really in my corner at this point. I'd love to have more, of course, because the more people you have recommending the books to other people, leaving reviews for the books, the more people are going to give it that chance because they'll see these people that say, oh yeah, this is good. So yeah, I can give it a shot. Yeah. So
Yeah, that's all you can do is just give it an opportunity, and if it does, well, it does. If not, there's always room for improvement. And it's just a matter of like we've been talking here on our podcast, is just a matter of find what works for you. And if it's not doesn't work for you the first time, or that particular uh now I'm blanking on words, that particular way of doing it doesn't work for you, there's always other methods, other ways of doing it.
yep. And even more importantly, especially with writing, I think that one of the very important things to remember as a writer is that just because a story doesn't work in one style doesn't mean it won't work in another. Um,
Yes.
so I say that because that the book that I had written that took 10 years to write, I've been working on the second draft of it, which I always say is really the 1.5 draft because I am rewriting it almost from scratch. So like it still has the bones of the original story, but I'm taking everything I've learned since finishing that book, since writing my other works now, and saying, no, I know how to tell these stories now. I know what I did wrong. And I can say that first version of that story, there was a lot wrong. I focused too much on the wrong plot points. I focused too much on the wrong interactions, that it became this over bloated story. And I think it's important to note that just because it didn't work with those plot points didn't mean that the bones of the story weren't good. So I went through these stages of, okay, well, maybe even though I'm a first person author, maybe I should try writing this book in third person perspective and see if maybe that puts a new light on the story. So I wrote actually about 25,000 words of that story in third person perspective, but it became such a completely different story that it lost its feel. It lost that kind of connection that you had to the main character, which to me was so important, because this book, which this one does have a name, it's Shift. This story is very much about this guy coming to terms with his self-imposed isolation, and how he has very much felt like he is against the world because he's different. So like when I tried to go third person with that and I got out of that character's head, it stopped being about him, which did not work for me. So I was like, no, this needs to be first person. So I started writing it in first person again, but again, with everything I had learned. And I asked a couple of my beta readers, hey, I want you to read the first 5 chapters of this third person perspective and the first 5 chapters of this first person. And you each tell me which one feels better. And thankfully they all came back to me, and I didn't tell any of them which one I preferred. I didn't tell any of them like what was the intended version. And unanimously, they each came back and said the first person perspective is better because I can actually understand this main character. So it really does come down to the story and how you need to tell that story.
Fantastic, man. Like I've seriously enjoyed like having you on, getting to learn so much about how a story develops, not from just from different authors' perspective, but from your perspective. And I will have I'll include the links to both your books in the description. And you mentioned that your book is available on Amazon, right? That's only exclusively there?
Okay, so you can find Cascade and Overflow on Kindle, paperback and hardcover through Amazon. You can get the audiobooks of both of them on Audible and iTunes.
Awesome. And I'll definitely include all that in the description. Zane, it's been fun having you on tonight. Like we've had
Absolutely,
an
man.
awesome conversation, and
Yeah,
we can only go up from here, right?
that's all we can do. We just got to keep moving forward, man. And actually, hey, these 2 books right here, these are for you. So next time I see you, I'm gonna
Thank you,
give these over
brother.
to you.
Thank you,
So
brother. Hey, sign them for me. I'd like to be able to display
you
them.
got it, man.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I want to make sure that when you make it to that point where you're successful, I can always say, hey, I know Zane from when his humble beginnings. You know,
Yep.
you've always been a humble individual since I've first met you, and I'm so happy for you that you've been able to achieve the kind of success you have now, and I can't wait to see you in the future.
Thanks, and I can't wait to see what you do too, man. I mean, you have really come such an amazingly long way since we first met, and I can't say how proud I am of you too, man.
I appreciate you, man, and I'm definitely excited, and I think this will be the first of many I guess many episodes we'll do together, because you know, as I've had guests on multiple times, you know, different topics, and you know, I just like to see people evolve all the time, and that's just awesome about getting to meet people, is seeing how they've evolved, how they've improved over time, and you know, just seeing them successful.
Absolutely, and I would love to be back on, man. Anytime you want to give me a holler or tap me, just give me a call. Maybe when I'm ready to start promoting the next book.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, that would be a great idea.
Okay, man. All right, hey, well, you know what? Anytime you need me, I'm here for you, man.
Oh, thank you, brother. And you can find this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and any other major podcasting outlet out there. There's always a saying that I use when I typically end the podcast, but I've kind of modified it a little bit. And it's this, if Zane and I can do these things, do all these things, become authors, motivational speakers, podcasters, despite our challenges and limitations in life, so can you. Oh, thank you, Zane.
Hey, no problem, man. I'll talk with you later.
And until next time, everybody, have a good one.